We've been going through a series in 1 Samuel. In last 5 weeks, we have looked at first 8 chapters. Last week, if you were here, we looked at chapter 8. And we saw now this dynamic prophet, Samuel, this national prophet in the league of Moses. He has grown old. His two sons, he has passed on his baton to his two sons. They have taken over from him. And we see in chapter 8 that they are not walking in the ways of Samuel. In fact, they are wicked, they are evil, they are exploiting their position for their personal gains. Israel gathers together, all the elders of the Israel, chapter 8 tells us, they unanimously gather and they march to Samuel and tell Samuel, look, we are tired, we need a king. Basically, what they said to Samuel is we don't want Yahweh as our king. We want a new king, just like other nations. We want this new king to win battles for us, just like other nations. Ironically, in chapter 7, God had won a decisive battle for Israelites when he defeated Philistines and slaughtered them. And yet, in chapter 8, Israelites say, we want a king, we don't want Yahweh as our king. Appoint for us a king. God says, okay, fine. God tells Samuel to warn them of the ramifications of this choice, that this new king whom they so desire will enslave them. And when they come back crying to the Lord, he will not listen to them. And God says, do you still want me to grant your request? They said, yes, give us a king so that we can be like other nations. And Lord says, your will be done. Now that's chapter 8. That's where we are. Now this morning, the next unit that we're going to look at, the story spreads across 3 chapters. Chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11. Okay, 3 chapters. So we were going to very quickly go through 3 chapters. In these chapters, we're going to see three things. The first thing we're going to see is the calling of the king. Chapter 9. In chapter 10, we are going to see the crowning or the coronation of this king. And the third chapter, we're going to see the conquest of this king of Israel, newly appointed king of Israel. So the backdrop, the context of these 3 chapters of this unit, of this narrative, is that people have rejected Yahweh as their king. God who loved them, God who took them out of Egypt, who formed them as a nation, instituted them as a nation, loved them, took care of them, protected them. They have rejected Yahweh as their king just because they want a king like other nations and they want to be like other nations. Instead of being a distinct nation, which was their calling, they want to be like other nations. So that's the backdrop to the 3 chapters. So let's look at chapter 9, the calling of the king, the first king of Israel. Now in verses 1 and 2, I'm not going to read all of it, so you follow with me. In verses 1 and 2, you see the introduction of this family. It's very random. The author doesn't tell you why is he introducing this family. In fact, all the way till verse 16, you don't get to know why this author is getting into so many details about this family. Only in verse 16 do you realize. Now in first 2 verses, the author, the narrator, he introduces the family. He introduces this man named Kish from Benjamin. He is a wealthy man. In verse 2, he talks about his son. He had a son named Saul. Now, one thumb rule of narratives is that you got to observe how the characters are introduced at the beginning. Because the way characters are introduced usually set the tone for the narrative. So you got to see in verse 2 how Saul as a man is introduced to us. Verse 2. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Now Saul is introduced as this young, handsome, dynamic, tall guy who's rich as well. Any woman's man he is. Okay. The other thing worth observing there is that the word used for him to describe him as tall or taller, the word has never been used for an Israelite. This is the only time this word tall is used for an Israelite. This word, in fact, has been used for Canaanites, for Anakites, for Amorites. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, the same word is used for a Philistine. Do you know who that Philistine is? Goliath. So what author is trying to do by painting Saul in this picture, by calling him tall, is he's saying he's the right guy. You wanted a guy like other nations? He is the man. He is taller than anyone else in Israel. He is the man that you're looking for. In verses 3 to 5, you see certain details. You see Kish, his female donkeys are lost. And so he calls his son Saul and says, take a servant, go and look for the donkeys. You see Saul travels, he goes distance to find those donkeys, but he's unable to find these donkeys. So he says, I want to go back to my daddy. My daddy will worry about me, so I want to go back to him. So he says, forget about donkeys, I'm going back to my father. In verses 6 to 10, the servant that he's accompanying Saul, he suddenly realizes that there is this great prophet, this national prophet in this region. Guess who that prophet is? Jesus? Samuel, you're awake. The prophet is Samuel. He says, look, there is a prophet in this region whose word always comes true. He might help us to find those donkeys. But Saul turns around and says, look, I don't have anything to pay this man. How will I get his service? So this servant, he rummages through his pockets, his bags, and suddenly he finds a quarter of a shekel of a silver. If you see the Hebrew, there is this element of surprise that comes out in the voice of this servant, as if the shekel was not there, but suddenly it is there. So finally Saul says, okay, let's go. Let's meet this great prophet. In verses 11 to 14, again, you see a lot of details. Author is going through a lot of details. Let me read to you. As they went up to the hill, verse 11, as they went up to the hill to the city, they met young women coming out to draw water and said to them, is the seer here? They answered, he is. Behold, he's just ahead of you. Hurry. He has come just now to the city because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. And afterward, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So they went up to the city. As they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming toward them on his way to the high place. Lot of details are going on here. The author is going through pain to give you all these details, and you wonder why. In verses 15 to 17, the author actually reveals what's going on. Why is he telling you so many details about this one family? God had visited Samuel, and God had told Samuel in a vision that tomorrow at this time, I will send you a man from Benjamin, who is going to be a prince over my people. Prince over my people. Verse 16, tomorrow about this time, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. You shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of Philistines. Why? For I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. Their cry has come to me. Two things worth observing in this passage. The first thing is that God says, I have appointed Saul as a prince. In all these 3 chapters, God does not address Saul as a king. The word is prince or ruler or leader, not a king. The second thing worth observing is when God says, I have seen and I have heard the cry of my people. These are the same 2 words that the author uses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. It's a time when the cry of people went up to the Lord when they were in Egypt, oppressed by the Pharaoh. And God says, I have seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry, and I have visited them. You see, although these people had denied Yahweh his kingship, they had turned away from Yahweh. They didn't want Yahweh as their king, but Yahweh has not resigned to be their king. He is still their king. That's why in these 3 chapters, he doesn't address Saul as a king, but as a ruler or a prince or a leader. Second thing worth observing is God. Although these Israelites, they have turned their back to God, they have sinned against the Lord, he still hears their cry. He still sees their misery, and he still acts on their behalf. A heart of this benevolent king who never gives up on his people. Never gives up on his people. His heart still goes out for them, although they have taken him off the throne of a king. In verses 18 to 25, we see Saul's encounter with Samuel. Finally, they meet each other. And Samuel tells Saul, don't worry about your donkeys. Inconsequential, totally. In fact, this nation has pinned its hope on you. You are desired by this nation. You are the hope of this nation. Don't worry about your donkeys. Don't worry about them. And Saul turns around and he says, me? I am from Benjamin, the smallest tribe. And even among Benjamin, I am of the smallest clan. And me? Well, Samuel takes him for the feast where he's going. Not only that, he grants him the place of honor at the head of the table. Not just that, he tells the chef, bring the choicest portion out that was kept for this appointed time. So the leg comes in front of Saul. And I'm wondering what is going in Saul's head right now. He set out just to find donkeys. And here he is, sitting at the head of a table, enjoying a meal with probably the most famous man in the country, Samuel. And verse 25 brings the end to that day. A day very confusing for Saul, but a day momentous for Samuel. You see, there are a lot of details in this chapter. Donkeys, and women, then that silver coin, presence of Samuel in that same area. They are there at the right time, at the right place, and you're wondering what is happening. You're wondering why this author is telling you so many details. You see, the fact is, God works in our lives behind the scenes. There's rarely a time when you have a visit from the angel of the Lord. You've had? No? Because that's a rarity. Rarely you hear God's audible voice in your ears. Probably he speaks through his word, but audible. Why? Because God works behind the scenes. He orchestrates every detail of your life, like he orchestrated every detail of Saul's life to bring him to a place where he will have encounter with him. To bring him to a place where his purpose for Saul's life will be fulfilled. You see, God as a master painter, when he's painting his magnum opus, his greatest work, he uses many colors. I'm sure Saul was frustrated looking for those donkeys in that heat, in that dry, barren place, looking for those donkeys. I'm sure he was frustrated. I'm sure it was not convenient for him. I'm sure he was confused as to what is happening. But God uses each and every corner of his life, each and every turn that he takes towards that one destination where he wants Saul to be. To fulfill God's purpose in his life. You see, Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, he says, and I love the New Living Translation version. It says, for we know that God works everything. God works everything for the good of those who love him, are called according to his purpose. God works everything. Through. Verse 29, he tells you what is God's purpose for your life: to be transformed into the image of Christ. That's God's purpose for your life. In order to bring that purpose to fulfillment, in order to bring that purpose to fruition, God uses every color on the canvas possible: the color of joy, the color of pain, the color of suffering, to ensure that he achieves his purpose in your life. You see, when God calls you, he ensures you don't miss the bus. He ensures you don't miss the bus. I'm sure some of you have had a rather random year. Random. Like Saul had a random day. With details that are so random. A frustrating year some of you have had. A frustrating month, a frustrating week some of you've had. Your visit to the church this afternoon is random. You were not planning to be here. We think it's random. But it's God painting this picture, weaving this tapestry through our life, through every detail of our life. And when that tapestry is finished, when that painting, his magnum opus, is finished, it's a portrait of Christ. And God uses every color to finish his portrait. Some of you are wondering, why am I going through this long, dry period of financial duress? Some of you are wondering, why am I going through this long period of sickness? Some of you are wondering, why am I going through this long period of setbacks and disappointments, and they are just crashing on me like waves? My dear friends, God is weaving a tapestry. He's working through every detail of your life. He's using every detail of your life. Every disappointment, every loss, every opportunity missed, every unanswered prayer, to take you to a point where you will fulfill his purpose. Chapter 10, verse 1. So while Saul is scratching his head as to what is going on, God is doing something really remarkable. You see, Samuel finally tells Saul what this is all about, or he reveals the mystery to him finally. He anoints him with the oil, kisses him, and then he says, hasn't the Lord anointed you and appointed you to be the prince, not the king, the prince over Israel, over my people, over my inheritance, over my heritage? Then in verses 2 to 8, Samuel gives Saul three signs to affirm his anointing and appointing. The first sign, he says, you'll go now, and there'll be a group of people who will meet you. They'll say, okay, your donkeys have been found, daddy is worried, why don't you come home? All right, that's the first sign. Second sign, he says, you'll meet three men going to Bethel. One man will be carrying 3 loaves of bread, then one man will be carrying 3 goats, and then one man will be carrying a jug of wine. They'll offer you 2 bread of loaves, take it. That's a second sign. Details, okay? Third sign, he says there'll be prophets coming, you'll encounter them, and when you encounter them, you will start prophesying. Verses 9 to 13, these signs come true as foretold by Samuel. But something beautiful happens. Something beautiful happens. Chapter 10, verse 9. When he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart. God gave Saul another heart. Go back to verse 6. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man. You see, now Saul has a new heart, and Saul has the Spirit of God with him. When God calls you, when he draws you out through the circumstances of his life so that he can meet with you, so that you can have an encounter with him, God gives you a new purpose in your life. When you meet with Christ through all those situations, when you reach the rendezvous point and you meet with Christ, he gives you a new meaning, a new purpose to your life. And not only does he give you a new meaning or a new purpose, he empowers you and equips you to achieve his purpose for your life. You see, if you read through, or if you read between the lines in chapter 9, Saul is portrayed as a dumb guy. If you read between the lines, 2 things. Saul is portrayed as a dumb guy. First thing, Saul is portrayed as a bad shepherd. As a bad shepherd. You see, first of all, the donkeys get lost. Secondly, he goes and he cannot find the donkeys. Third, he is willing to give up the donkeys because he wants to go back to his daddy. Now, a good shepherd doesn't do that. Later on, we'll see David, and we'll see David actually fighting bears and lions for his flock. But this man is ready to give up his flock. He's not a good shepherd. Secondly, he's a spiritually blind and an ignorant man. Why? First of all, he wants to pay a prophet to get work done. Second, everyone in Israel knows who Samuel is but Saul. Look at this guy, I don't know where he lives. Everybody knows who Samuel is. He is the national prophet. But he doesn't know. He meets Samuel and he says, where is the prophet? Samuel says, I am the prophet. So Saul is painted in the picture where he might be handsome, he might be tall, he might be wealthy, but he is no king material. But in chapter 10, we see that God has transformed his heart. The literal translation is God has overturned this man to become another man. God has given him his spirit. In verse 7, God has promised him his presence. Samuel says, God is going to be with you. When God calls, when God gives you a purpose, he empowers you and equips you for the new purpose. Saul was given a new heart. Saul was given the Spirit of God. But verses 14 to 16, you see something strange. Now Saul goes further. He meets his family. His uncle comes out and he meets with his uncle. And uncle says, where were you? He's like, oh, those donkeys. I was finding those donkeys. And he said, okay, did you find them? He said, no, but I met this man Samuel. You met Samuel? Even the uncle knows who Samuel is. You met Samuel? What did he say? Verse 16. And Saul said to his uncle, he told us plainly about the donkeys, but about the matter of the kingdom of which Samuel had spoken, he did not tell him anything. You wonder, he should be excited about it. He's going to be the first king of Israel. Come on, you've scored 99% and you want to tell your parents. You just passed your civils. You want to tell your parents. You've got this amazing promotion. You want to tell your parents or your spouse or your siblings, whoever, friends. And here is Saul. He's been anointed as king of Israel. And he doesn't want to share that. You wonder why. Move on. Verses 17 to 19. Samuel gathers everyone at Mizpah. This is the time. This is the big moment. This is it. Saul's glory. But before he does that, before Samuel does that, he warns Israel again. He said, you want a king? You're getting a king. But remember, you have forsaken the Lord your God. The Lord who called you out of Egypt, who loved you, who still protects you, saves you from calamities and crisis. You have forsaken him. Nobody says anything. So he moves on. Again, you see verses 20, 21, God orchestrating everything, every detail. They cast lots. The first lot falls on the tribe of Benjamin. They again cast lots. The lots again fall on the household or the tribe of Kish. Then they again cast lots and the lot falls on Saul. God is still working. But behold, Saul is missing. They say, bring out Saul. Saul is missing. Where is he? Nobody knows. So they inquire of the Lord again, Lord, where is this man? The Lord says he's hiding in the baggage. Bring him out. So people run, they bring him out and they anoint him. They say, go home. Verse 26. Saul also went to his home at Gibeah, and with him went men of valor. Notice this, whose hearts God had touched. Whose hearts God had touched. So God called Saul out of a life of anonymity and gave him a life of royalty. God empowered him and equipped him to be the king that God has called him to be. God gave him a new heart. God gave him a new spirit. God promised his presence, and now God gave him favor in the eyes of people. You see, when God calls you, he ensures that every detail of your life works towards taking you to that one point of encounter with God. And when you encounter God, He gives you a purpose and a meaning to your life. He empowers you. He equips you like He did Saul to bring about His purpose, to bring about His desires in your life. He says, I'll do everything for you. I'll equip you with everything. I'll give you everything that you need to be my disciple, to become Christ-like. But He says, okay, one thing you have to do. Just one thing you have to do from your end, and that is to step up. That is to step up and embrace your calling. That is to step up and embrace your identity, to step up and embrace your destiny. God says, I'll give you everything you need. I'll equip you. I'll empower you. But step up. Own it. Don't hide. When I look back at my life, the events, the pain, the confusion, the tumultuous journey that led me to encounter Christ, to begin with, it was random. Now as I look back, it's a beautiful journey that God took me through. Painful, yet beautiful. Every piece fits in that journey. Even the death of my father. It just fits perfectly into that tapestry. When I met Christ, when I encountered Him, He gave me a new life, a new purpose. He gave me a new heart. Ezekiel 36 verse 26, I will put a new heart in you and I will put my spirit within you. He gave me a new heart. But He said, Joy, you got to stand up for me. You got to stand up against this world and tell this world that you are a Christian. I come from a different faith. I come from a Sikh faith. I said, sure, Lord. Whatever you will. I had no idea what I meant by that when I said, sure, Lord. That first year of my life was the most difficult year as a Christian. To bear abuses, threats, it was very difficult. And as I look back, like, wow, how did I do that? God empowers, God equips. I would have left the building the first year, but God empowers, God equips. He called Saul out, gave him a purpose, empowered him and equipped him to achieve that purpose. But that tall man hid behind the baggages. Why are you hiding? Some of you are hiding. You're not stepping up to embrace your calling. You're not stepping up to embrace your destiny and your identity. You're hiding. Hiding from probably sharing the gospel with your colleagues, with your friends, with your siblings, with your parents. Hiding probably from standing up to unethical practices at your workplace. Hiding from probably confessing your unethical practices in your school and your workplace, your neighborhood. Why are you hiding? See, you know what you're hiding from. I can tell you why you are hiding. Because I hide. I confess. I hide because at times I feel that my contribution is going to be inconsequential. I hide at times because I fear the consequences of my action in my own life. Forget others. I fear that. And so I hide. Why are you hiding? And what are you hiding from? You see, God commands you to step up and embrace your calling. God's commands are always accompanied with His promises. When God says to you, stand up, He says, my presence will be with you. Matthew 28, verse 20. When God calls you to step up, He says, my power will be with you. Acts 1:8. When God calls you to step up, He promises you a life much more glorious than this life. Romans 8:18, Paul says, for the present sufferings are not even worth comparing to the glory that will be revealed in us. God asks you, why are you hiding then? God is in the business of transformation, but he calls you to stand up. People who stood up, he transformed and used them to shape nations, to shape people groups. Right from the Bible. Abraham, Moses, Jeremiah, Daniel, Peter, Paul, many. Why? Because they stood up. They stood up. They stepped up to God's call. He says, I'll empower you. I'll give you what you want. Fulfill my purpose. Fulfill my purpose. Be the salt in this ever decaying world. Be the salt to heal this broken world. Be the salt to bring flavor in this dead world. Be the light and dispel the darkness. Be the light and lead people to Christ. Step up. If you're part of this church, then step up and embrace the vision to cultivate Christ-centered communities, to redeem Delhi and beyond for the glory of God. Embrace that vision and work with us. Step up. Step up. Now is the time. This city needs you. This nation needs you. The only hope of this nation is the gospel. And if you are hiding, you see, when you step up, God brings victory. When you step up and embrace your calling, your destiny, your identity, God brings victory. Chapter 11, very quickly. Saul goes back home. Suddenly, one of the cities, Jabesh Gilead, is besieged by Ammonites. They send out SOS. Saul gets the SOS. He sees their misery. He cuts his oxen into pieces, sends to all the people in Israel, calls them out for war. Verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord fell upon people. Not the fear of Saul. Fear of the Lord fell upon people. And he mustered around 330,000 people to go against Ammonites. They fight Ammonites, they slaughter Ammonites, and they rescue Jabesh Gilead. So some of the people who had critiqued in last chapter 10, verse 27, critiqued Saul, because people are exalting Saul, they say, who are the people who said Saul should not be the king? Let's bring those people and kill them. This is what Saul says in verse 13, chapter 11, verse 13. But Saul said, not a man shall be put to death this day. Why? For the Lord has worked salvation. Who has worked salvation? The Lord. Why? Saul stepped up. My dear friends, God brings victory. God brings salvation. But he calls you to step up and not hide behind the baggages, hide behind your fears, hide behind your pride. Step up.